Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast. I am your host, Kate Kavanaugh, and it is my favorite thing to bring you these conversations week after week. We just surpassed a big milestone here on the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast. 1 year, 52 episodes of deep dives into the soil, into our minds, into our bodies. And if you've been listening, you'll know that I really believe that all of those are actually one. We are just matter flowing in and out of one another. We are just consciousness made matter in these meat suits of our bodies. For those of you that might be new to the podcast, I want to give a little introduction to the way that I do business around here. For those of you that are longtime listeners, I want to thank you for supporting me in this particular effort that is so important to me. And that is that we often dive right into the deep end with guests without giving a backstory, especially when that guest has shared their backstory many times over. I always link to some podcasts in the show notes where you can find that guest backstory in case you want to get caught up. This week is no different. I sit down with my friend and just the most amazing woman, Katie Forrest of Force of Nature Meats and Rome Ranch, formerly of Epic Bar, of Thunderbird Bars. You might have seen Katie's incredible work as an entrepreneur in the grocery store, or you might have ordered from Force of Nature Meats. I became familiar with Epic Bar really early on. It actually launched around the same time that my husband and I started our butcher shop, Western Daughters Butcher Shop in Denver, Colorado. And it could not be missed because of the branding. And I knew instantly upon seeing it that they had a story to tell. They went through a whole process with Epic Bar and eventually sold it to General Mills. I love this little fact that I don't think we cover in this episode, but after they sold it, General Mills hired a soil scientist for the first time in their 100+ history. I want to take a short moment to talk about the importance of aggregators. I really encourage you to stick around to the part of this episode where Katie and I talk about aggregators. I think that oftentimes we get caught up in the regenerative agriculture movement on focusing on only the small. And it's incredibly important that we have small, micro, medium, and large players within this space, thinking about how we support farmers and ranchers that generally operate on 1.5% margins, and building diversity in terms of aggregators, producers, distributors, processors, butcher shops, grocery stores, farmers markets, direct to consumer. All of these parts are part of the ecosystem of what it means to support an alternative food system to the corporate giants that exist. So I really want to highlight that I think that aggregators are a really important part of the food chain. And I was really excited to have this conversation with Katie, who I think is one of the best aggregators out there. If honestly, she is the best aggregator out there. And the way that her and her husband, Taylor Collins, think about their business is absolutely stunning. Katie has a story, like many of us, that she came to this way of eating through health. She was a raw vegan who was a competitive athlete and was struggling to really tap into her body and was struggling with issues with her knee at a very young age, and found that within 2 weeks of eating meat, so much of this subsided. It changed her life and really inspired her to go out and to look at these systems. It's a story I love, and I'm going to link to an episode that her and her husband Taylor did on Taylor's podcast, Where Hope Grows. And I think that you'll really resonate with her backstory if it's something that you're interested in, because her and I just dive straight into the deep end, as I am so wont to do. I had the incredible opportunity to meet Taylor and Katie this past December when they invited my husband and I out to Rome Ranch to participate in a bison harvest with them. And I've spoken a little bit about it on this podcast, but it was one of the most seminal moments of my career. I think that the way that they are thinking about the interconnected web of life that is our soil, our food, our meat, the animals on it, the communities within it, is really a model that can prove as an example for so many of us. And I am incredibly heartened to be going back to Texas in just a few weeks to participate in their What Good Shall I Do conference. This is going to be in Fredericksburg, Texas on April 21st and 22nd with an optional field day on April 23rd. And I will be one of the headlining speakers, and I have an incredible speech planned, I hope, that I have actually been workshopping all day here about the way that all of these cycles here on Earth dovetail in and out of one another, creating this interconnected web of life throughout the universe. And that's kind of the theme of what I'm talking about. But the theme of the conference is where hope grows. And I am so excited to be a part of bringing hope into a space where I think whether we're doom scrolling or we're on news, we see a lot of doom and gloom. And I think even within the regenerative agriculture space, there are often facts and figures and statistics that are thrown at us that can feel like there isn't hope. I think that hope is an incredibly powerful force, and it will be woven throughout the speech that I'm giving. I would love to encourage you, even though it might feel a little bit last minute, if you are on the fence about this conference. I think it's going to be a really incredible place to connect, to learn, and to be a part of community that is building hope outside of ourselves. There is a link to get tickets in the show notes, and there are a very limited amount, maybe only 2 or 3 tickets left, where you can use my special code to get $75 off your tickets, and that code is WGSID, Kate, Kate, 75. So if you're on the fence and you are waiting for that little push, this is your moment. Please come join me and speakers like Ann Bickley, Daniel Griffith, Judith Schwartz, as well as Joel Salatin and so many other incredible speakers and exhibitors as we explore what it means to grow hope inside of this regenerative revolution. I have a little bit of business to attend to at the front end of every podcast, and that is if you have found this podcast to give you hope or to help be a part of your day as you are farming or fencing or driving, or it's just something that you enjoy these deep dive conversations, would you do me a favor and leave a rating and review? This is an act of reciprocity that helps people find the podcast and feel a connection to it and draw them in. And these stories are something I really want to share with an increasing audience. Y'all have left over 100 5-star reviews on Apple iTunes, and I'd love to read one of them to you now, just to inspire you if you feel inspired to do so, to leave a review. This review is from Aubrey, and it says, "A true pleasure to listen to. I love this podcast so very much. I have diligently listened to each episode from the very beginning, savoring every moment. Kate's long-form way of interviewing evokes so much thought and really allows you to center into each topic. After each episode, I have wanted to write a review, but was simply left speechless. Each new episode is a true delight and something I look forward to each week. On days where I'm bored, I often consider going back and re-listening to episodes. Thank you, Kate, for bringing this podcast to life." Thank you, Audrey, for that interview. It just warmed my heart. I love that you enjoy the long form. I know that it is a time investment, and I so appreciate each and every one of you that have invested your time in listening to the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast. As always, if you want to leave a review and shoot me a screenshot on Instagram or via email, I would be more than happy to send you a handwritten note in return so that we can connect in a tangible space. Without further ado, however, I want to dive into this incredible interview with Katie Forrest, and I hope to see you at the What Good Shall I Do conference in Fredericksburg, Texas on April 21st and 22nd. I am just so excited to see you there and can't wait to meet. Here's Katie.
So Taylor always acts like he gets me gifts for me, but really he's getting like a gift for the ranch. Like one time he got me a mule, and he was like, "This is your mule and nobody's allowed to drive it but you. And so it'll always be clean." And there's literally like a tub of seaweed, kelp, soil mixture sitting on top of it right now. And there's shovels everywhere and it's so disgusting. And it's not mine. It's definitely not mine. But anyway, so he got me some geese for my birthday. And these geese, we tried to make them like sweet and loving. And so I was holding them and petting them and kissy. And it turns out they're geese still. And they're still mean as can be.
Yep.
And so, they've attacked the girls, they've attacked me, they've attacked pretty much everybody. And it's been fine. And we decided we were going to put them with the turkeys, they're no longer guests of our homestead area. They belong to the ranch now. But just over the last, month or so, they've been coming back into our yard, I think, because, spring is coming and there's growth and all the things. And so they've been coming back into our yard and they've been really pissing Taylor off because they'll take little bites of new growth, some wildflowers that he just put in or whatever. And so he set up this containment area around our house where the turkey, they can no longer have access to our house. Except they still do, because they're still sneaky as shit. Yeah, they're geese.
They're geese.
They're so smart. But anyway, so you can just imagine, they've been coming in and we chase them off, and then they come in and we chase them off, and we set up barriers, and we, the dogs don't even have access to their food anymore because the geese. It's just a sticky situation. But yesterday we went into town for a couple hours, and we came back. This was the final straw. We came back, and the geese were in our pool, swimming in our swimming pool, swimming, so full of joy. They were so full of joy. It was a beautiful sight and just torture all at the same time. I was so mad because our pool guy had just come and cleaned out the pool, and there's not duck shit. There's geese shit everywhere, just all over the pool. I was like, Scout, if you go in here, you're actually going to potentially die. Do not step foot in this pool. It's so disgusting. And there's goose feathers and the oil from their preening. Oh yeah. It's everywhere. It's just like a coated mess. So we're having goose problems right now.
Geese are Josh and I have tried to tame geese multiple times. You get them in the spring and they're little and you just love on them and they're super affectionate. And then they reach this point where they just decide that they're going to be assholes and terrors. And there's no coming back from it.
No, there really isn't. And it's just such a sad thing. I mean, the thing is I'm like their mom still. So they still approach me hello, are you going to give me those little treats or whatever? And then I'll lean down and I'll give them treats and they'll eat them out of my hand. And then I'll stand up, turn around and they'll bite me. Which has happened.
Hiss at you, chase you out of their area.
My area.
Violently. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's become theirs. This is just, it's the Geese's farm now.
It's true.
We thin their herd. In it. Yeah, we just live with them. We thinned our herd to, I think we have 5 now. We had too many, maybe 20 geese were wandering around, and they're just, it's their farm. It's their farm, and we just live here. We're just renting from the geese.
Well, anyway, so we're good aside from the geese being just terrorists.
Being geese. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, being geese.
I thought a lot about how to start this podcast. I'm terrible at starting podcasts. This is like the bane of my existence. How do you ever start talking to people that you really enjoy and respect? And I thought I'd start with this really weird story of Josh and mine, because I think it might resonate with you.
Yeah.
So, and I like to kind of get out of that space where, I don't know, I just always feel like backstories can feel a little arduous, and it just feels like the spiel that you give at some point. So hopefully this kind of circumvents that. Many, many years ago, right after we started Western Daughters, we were approached to be in an article of couples that ran their businesses together. And they wanted us to pick 5 words to describe our love and our relationship. And I really agonized over it. And everybody in, the other couples in the article, it was like, oh, caring and affectionate and strong. And I picked, fuck it, let's do this.
That feels
5 words. 5 words to just describe this way that Josh and I had started living life, where we would just sort of dive into the deep end of the pool would just kind of see something and be like, yeah, let's do it. Let's just figure out how to do it. And as I was going back through all of the podcasts that you and Taylor have done together, which are wonderful and hilarious, by the way, there was an element of, fuck it, let's do this in there.
Totally. And I think that's why we connected so much with you guys. We're so similar in so many ways. There has to be an element of like, fuck it, let's just do this. Otherwise you don't get anything done. You never start and you never complete anything.
No, you overthink it.
Totally. Which is a part of preparation. Preparation is all about overthinking.
Mm-hmm. That's what I do with the podcast. I like to overthink it.
I get in a bad place when I prepare for things.
Yeah, I have to with the podcast. It just feels like something I have to do. But with businesses, it's been a little bit different. And honestly, just our whole relationship has been this component of just kind of diving in together. And I think that you kind of figure it out on the way, and that's the best part. And so I was looking at the way you started all these different businesses and moved through them, kind of shifting as you guys evolved and shifted and changed in your philosophies and life and needs. And I loved it. I don't know. I really loved it. I didn't realize how deep some of that went, that it evolved from Thunderbird into Epic, into Rome, into Force of Nature. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I feel like I have to interrupt you really quick. You look so beautiful.
Oh, thanks. Oh,
I love your top. I'm sorry. I'm just like, oh, I need that top. Where did you find that thing? That's amazing.
I'll send you this top when we're done.
No, I'm not taking your clothes, but I sure like it.
Oh, I was just going to send you a link to the top. You don't have to.
Yeah, okay. I won't. I thought you were going to physically take off your top and send it to me. No, I wasn't gonna strip on the podcast. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, don't be sorry at all.
So where do you want to go with that?
Where do I want to go with that? I was just going to see where you were going to take it. I want to just know what drives feeling into things for you. Like, what is the thing that allows you to just feel into, okay, this is the space. We're just going to go and we're just going to do it. And we're going to see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, you just said we started with Thunderbird and then Epic and then Rome and Force of Nature. But what's funny is Taylor and I actually had a business before Thunderbird. We had a recycling business. I don't know if you knew that.
I did. I caught that on one of your talk about that a little bit though.
Yeah.
I like this lesser known business.
The recycling business, I think, was awesome because we were in college and it was before they were doing commercial recycling around Austin. And so a restaurant couldn't recycle their milk jugs. And so we were the solution. We were going to save the world through, picking up people's recycling goods at their restaurants. And Taylor was really good at like merchandise. He was in a hardcore band. Taylor was in a hardcore band.
I caught that and was
and he was always in charge.
It made sense. It made sense somehow. I was like,
I gotta send you some stuff to listen to. But he was in charge of their merch, and so he was really good at designing just like little nothings. And so really, like, the company revolved around his design of stickers. I was like, oh, your stickers are so cool. We're going to definitely be able to start a business because we have cool stickers. This is how we're going to present it to people. But the recycling business was awesome. It paid for our college and tuition and our food, basically. And
it's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it was, I don't know how, but we used to survive like on a good $400 a month. It really kind of blows my mind.
It was a different time also.
It was a different time.
I feel like that's also like worth saying. I don't know if that's possible now.
I don't think so. I can barely leave the grocery store paying less than $400.
Nope.
A week.
That's not how the grocery store works.
Yeah, it's really not. But, it's the way that Taylor and I have sort of always operated is, there's an opportunity and we see it and we like, go for it. It's always been like, is this interesting? Is it fun? Is it something we're passionate about? And are we going to not have to see it as work? In all business has sort of been like an extension of ourselves in general. Like, would we be recycling anyway? Would we likely be going to the back of restaurants and picking up milk jugs because we didn't want them to go in the trash and we prefer them to go? Yeah, we'd probably be doing that anyway. So somebody might as well be paying us to do it. And like, same with the food businesses. With Thunderbird, for instance, we were making these bars, and we were just like, well, why would we just have them for ourselves? We could make money doing this. Let's sell them to other people. And it's just you see a door and you walk through it, and that's sort of how we've always been.
I think it takes a certain amount of, I don't know what it is. Sometimes ignorance. I think it's courage. Yeah, but I was going to say it's almost stupidity. Like, at least it has been for me. I don't want to put that on you and Taylor.
No, it's ignorance.
Yeah. There's this starry-eyed, like, oh yeah, we're going to open up a butcher shop. Yeah. That's a great idea.
It'll be so easy.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. We'll just figure it out.
You just need a counter, a refrigerator, some knives. Done.
What could go wrong?
Nothing.
Yeah,
food safety.
I think it takes a certain amount of, I think ignorance is actually the perfect word. It takes like some naivete.
Yeah. I think what's really been interesting to me in our business journey in general is, I don't want to say, this sounds really ego-y, which I'm super not, but when people admire what we've done and say like, I could never do that. That is so hard. And especially these people are like business people. They went to business school and they do consulting work, but they've never maybe actually done a business because they're too scared because they know too much. Yes. They know too much about how it could go wrong and what the books look like and all the things. Uh-huh. And so when people admire what we've done, I'm always just a little taken aback by it. Because really, we just didn't know what we were doing.
Which probably made you better at it. And I think, this is something that I've asked myself with our business. Like, have we been better at it because we've just had to figure it out? I liken it to you jump off a cliff and you don't have a parachute, but you have to figure out how to build a parachute on the way down. And because you're in this forced situation, your back is sort of against the wall. It inspires a different level of creativity in your approach to business versus somebody who has this robust business plan and this background in business and knows enough about P&Ls to not go into anything related to meat and agriculture.
I think a big part of it also is that when you guys too, like when you go into business, we were all in. Like, everything on the table. We didn't have savings. Everything that we put into it was everything that we had. And so there was no turning back. There was no failing. There was no opportunity there was no cushion. We weren't just like taking money from investors and being like, well, I hope this works out, but it's not our money. And that puts like a totally different level of, pressure to succeed.
Oh yeah.
And I know you feel this too, but you are the employer. You are sending somebody a paycheck that is paying for their family to exist. And so like your failure is their family's failure in a way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then and I think this will come up again in this conversation, but when you are building an ecosystem of business and it's not just you anymore, it is employees, but it's also producers, for us, all of a sudden the livelihood of 3 farms had to do with the success of our business. And that also puts this level of pressure that you really want to succeed, not just for yourselves, but for the benefit of this little ecosystem that you've built.
Right. Being on both sides of that, being in the business realm and also in the ranching farming world, I don't see so many people like you that feel like you're doing the rancher service. Or not, you are keeping those people afloat.
Interesting.
Like you are an anomaly in that respect, which is sad.
It is sad because that has been, we've, over the course of 10 years, we haven't been very successful on paper at Western Daughters, but we have put almost $6 million back into the hands of farmers and ranchers along the Front Range. And that matters to me because I think what we're building is bigger than just that little butcher shop.
Right.
And I think, and maybe we can just dive into it because it's here. When you're thinking about the ecosystem of a business, it is, what we were talking about this morning. And I think what you said so beautifully, it's building symbiotic relationships with different partners, different players within this little business ecosystem that help create something that we hope thrives.
Yeah, absolutely. Or at least so it should be. So it should be a symbiotic relationship. And I think that's where the term business always just, or agriculture versus agribusiness, it sort of comes into play. It's funny. We actually had a tour group from a school and they were majoring in agribusiness. And it definitely puts the business part above the culture part, and this idea that like there's an ecosystem behind the business of agriculture. It's just so disappointing to me.
Yeah, I think that I'm really interested to talk to you about this of all people, because I think business is a really interesting thing to build. And I think teasing out agribusiness, putting business over culture is certainly one thing. But what I've seen just being in experience with you and Taylor is a really acute ability to put culture over business, to create that ecosystem of partnerships and of the way that people feel in your business. Like going to Rome, there was a felt sense of what you guys were building in terms of an ecosystem, and that there was symbiosis and that there was this idea of growth. And some of what we talked about this morning as I was thinking about top down and bottom up influence, and you came back and you talked about scale, and you talked about scale in a way that had not occurred to me and kind of blew my mind. And this is something I've been talking about on the podcast, is that we do have to scale some of these businesses, that there is a point at which they work, that they function, that they have some financial sustainability as well as, ecological sustainability. But you brought in scale in terms of balance, in terms of a literal scale, like the, 2 pans on a pivot.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that this was so So beautiful. And so how do we find more balance in scaling business and more of this building an ecosystem, or you called it business as a perennial plant, which I loved.
Yeah, I the concept that there can be balance in business, I think it's only like a mindset. I don't think that the way that business is operated traditionally, that there is such thing as balance, because there's an extraction on one side to benefit the one side, and a degradation of some sort, whether it's through employees, through the environment, et cetera, in order to support the business growth. And so, like we were talking about that scale. So whether it's profit or resources or whatever, like the more there is here, the less there is on this other side. And so there quite literally can't be balance in business, in my opinion. And so you think, or maybe there can be, but I think that means that when we talk about scale, that balance has a threshold. Like there has to be a threshold. It can't just keep increasing and increasing. And I'm definitely not the first person to think about business like this. No.
But it's the way that you talk about it is different than anything I've ever heard.
Okay. Well, I think about it like business should have a cap, like a growth cap. Like all businesses should acknowledge and recognize where the resource limit should be. Like when is taking too much, and how can you bring that back down to create some sort of equilibrium. I got you. To find that balance. And I think what I had presented to you this morning is that I think business should operate like a perennial plant, so you have a perennial. So perennials, they come back every year. Annuals, they die off. You have to replant them, or maybe they could seed themselves. But so perennial plants come back every single year. And so, so I think about that in terms of business. So how can a business like plant a seed or drop a seed and establish really, really strong roots and a really, really strong foundation. And the growth goes underneath. It goes underneath the soil. So it's longer and stronger roots at the same time that you're building roots above ground. So that would be, like market share and scalability and access to consumers, impacting producers, et cetera. And so these things should be happening in equilibrium within a perennial plant. And so the goal of the perennial plant is to come back year over year. I don't know what the lifespan of a perennial plant is. I think it probably varies.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
I've been thinking about this recently.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah, like a pear tree can live for hundreds of years, but a peach tree kind of 30 years, kind of max. So,
and what about a stand of grass?
Right. Exactly. I don't know. I need to look these things up.
Yeah, but we're gonna have to. I'll do some digging.
I think just like there's a variety of different types of businesses, that should have lifespans. Same with plants, and so we should be looking at different businesses as what is the lifespan of this business? Is this a lifelong business, or is this maybe just a couple years and then kind of die off business? But anyway, going back to the perennial plant. So you have above ground and a below ground growth that should be in balance, in equilibrium. And the real goal should be resilience. So as every year, those roots are getting deeper and stronger and above ground, you should be having a plant that is larger, bigger, stronger. But at some point it caps, like you're not going to have a pear tree that is 300 feet tall. And so at some point there is a cap to that tree.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's how we should be looking at businesses that we develop. Like, what is our cap? And like, how can that cap sustain what we deem successful? Like, how can we pay as many people as possible, support as many farmers as possible, keep our business strong and resilient through times of drought, whether that's an economic recession or a real drought. And just kind of looking to nature as to how to form businesses. I mean, it knows best, really.
It does.
Yeah. But the whole goal of business should be resilience and strength. It shouldn't be growth, because then your roots are going to be too weak. They haven't built enough strength underneath the ground in order to support this high hockey stick growth type of relationship.
Yeah. And then you have a business that's potentially fragile, or that growth in perpetuity is more extractive than what you can find in that, at least attempting to find balance.
Right.
How do you think this fits in with regenerative agriculture in particular, as you've moved more and more towards using the soil as a foundation for your business? And I think you said that. I think I heard you on an interview. Yeah, you said with Taylor, the soil is the foundation of everything that we do. And I think when you make that your mission, or at the heart of your work, then that it really lends itself to that idea of how you're growing that business. But how do you think that some of these concepts apply to regenerative agriculture, which I think we're all kind of trying to figure out how to find our way in business with?
How does give me a different workaround with that question.
Yeah. When we're talking about building balance of foundational root growth and the sort of aerial plant, and looking at that sort of scalability, that business ecosystem where maybe you don't have growth in perpetuity, but you have a really nice flourishing system. Employees are happy, producers are happy. How has that been as you've applied it to regenerative agriculture in particular? Because I think we're all struggling a little bit to find how we scale, and I'm kind of putting scale in quotes here.
Yeah.
This particular business.
I think I told you that this morning, one of the things that I love so much that Will Harris has said before, and it just sticks with me all the time, is that regenerative agriculture isn't scalable. He says that regenerative agriculture is replicable. And so I think that really ties into that idea that there's a cap as to what you can really do on your land. There should be a cap. We should recognize that there is a limited amount of things, especially pertaining to access to resources like water, rainfall, et cetera, et cetera. Like, we can obviously have an infinite positive impact on the way that we're managing the land, but there should still be a cap that we recognize. And I think the way that you can scale regenerative agriculture within your own ecosystem, like within your own ranch or your own farm, is to build resiliency through diversity, just like plants do. And so plants are building, the ecosystem outside is building resiliency through an abundance of plant species, tree species, insect species, bird species. And so the more of things that there are, the stronger your ecosystem is. And so that's how we like to think about it with our business. Also, our Roam Ranch business is resiliency through diversity. And so, we have an abundance of animal species, plant species, et cetera, but we also have an abundance of enterprises here. So we have a hunting program, we have tours, we have butchery, we have harvest, we have private tours, we have an Airbnb. And so, like, if any one of those things fails, we have all the other things to help keep us afloat. Like, we have a solid, resilient foundation, regardless of how any one of those particular things is doing. And I think that's how you have to think about regenerative agriculture in general. Is, I think, just doing any one thing on land is not going to help you scale to any capacity with resilience or with a strong foundation. Like, you have to be doing many of things in order to build a strong foundation, in order to build everything up at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That was beautifully said. Did you feel all of these things before you moved to the ranch? You grew up in Austin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was this just in you, or how has moving to Rome and witnessing some of these things, like witnessing diversity, have you internalized that for business, or is this something that was just always this viewpoint, something that was always just cooked into what it is to be Katie?
No, I don't think I've had this perspective for more than, I don't know, 10 years or so. It wasn't until I really started like getting my feet on the ground at other people's ranches and other people's farms that I could feel what resilience felt like. Living in the city, I never felt resilient. There's an abundance of opportunity in quotes, and there's an abundance of enterprises, but none of those things were ever in a symbiotic relationship. In a city, there's so very little symbiosis. It's actually quite a bit of competing for resources, for space, for this and that. Everything is in competition. It feels like in a city. And the ironic part is, in biology class growing up, I was always taught that in nature, everything is actually in competition. Everything in nature is in competition. That's how you make your way to the top. Wow. And the lesson should actually be that everything is actually in symbiosis. Like every single thing in nature is actually collaborating, not competing. And so I always had it backward living in the city. And it wasn't until I went to ranches and farms that we were buying from, getting our supply for our products, where I started like connecting all the dots, because there was no way for me to experience. And I'm very much like an experiential person. Like I can't just be told a concept. I really need to experience it. There was no way for me to experience what regenerative ag was without like quite literally having no shoes on, putting my feet in regenerating soil and hearing the birds and seeing the difference, feeling it, smelling it, all, it's just it's a full body experience for me.
I love that. And I actually pulled, and I'm going to read this quote. I couldn't decide if I was going to read it, but I pulled this right this morning when we were kind of texting back and forth about feeling, because I've been asking myself a lot lately how feeling plays a role in how we relate to our environments, to our people, to our ranches and our farms and our food. So I'm going to read this quote.
Okay.
Because I really like what you just said about biology being a lot more about symbiosis than it is about competition. So this is from Andreas Weber, who I'm obsessed with right now. And he starts, biology is joining the physical sciences in a groundbreaking revolution. It is discovering how the individual experiencing self is connected with all life, and how this meaningful self must be seen as the basic principle of organic existence. More and more researchers agree, feeling and experience are not human add-ons to an otherwise meaningless biosphere. Rather, selves, meaning and imagination, are the guiding principles of ecological functioning. The biosphere is made up of subjects with idiosyncratic points of view and emotions. Scientists have started to recognize that only when they understand organisms as feeling, emotional, sentient systems that interpret their environments and not as automatons slavishly obeying stimuli can they ever expect answers to the great enigmas of life.
Dang, that's quite the quote.
Yeah. But I've been thinking about this a lot, about if we're not having experiences of feeling, if we're not actually connecting to some of these spaces, how can we have any investment or relationship with them? And I think that one of the many things that you and Taylor are doing so beautifully is inviting people in to have an experience that allows them to connect and internalize that experience and really feel it and take it with them to change maybe how they think about getting food in the future, or how they think about the piece of steak that's on their plate. And I think it's really incredible to create such a good container for people to come in and to feel.
Yeah, I think that we live in a world where there's such a lack of opportunity to feel. It's constant distraction. I find myself in it, and I live in a very distraction-free world.
Yeah, I find myself in it too.
Yeah, and I can only imagine what it's like to live in a place where distraction is just, it is so over-consuming. And when we have people out here, is oftentimes the first time that they don't have their phone out for 3 hours at a time, for the first time, maybe like ever, except for when they sleep. And so I think just being like so entrenched and present with themselves and their surroundings is just so critical. I literally just got the girls this book. It's real sweet. It's called Slow Down. I'm going to have to remember who wrote it, but there's like 3 or 4 versions. It's a really sweet book, but it's called Slow Down. And one of them is called Slow Down and Be Present Now. And it's stories about different little ecosystems that you should just go outside and observe. And I think the first one was like, watch a field mouse, like build a nest. And the second one was watch a grasshopper jump. And like, just how fascinating it is to see its legs extend and see how far it can go, et cetera. And it encourages this idea of like really taking in your environment, because there's so much beautiful experiences happening just right outside your doorstep. But if you don't allow yourself to be in those moments, you just miss it all. So the people that actually come out to the ranch, I mean, obviously they're seeking out that experience. They're seeking out wanting to feel something that they've never felt before. For instance, like watching an animal die, killing it themselves. And these are experiences that I had never had experience with, even up to 6 years ago. And so allowing a safe place for that, I think, is really important. It's an interesting pull for me, because our ranch it's so much a part of our lives. I mean, it is our home. It is truly our home. And so opening it up is opening up some sort of vulnerability for me.
Yes.
And allowing people to come in, because, people can come in with all types of, whether it's exceptionally accepting and grateful and peaceful, to the very opposite. And thankfully, we have really created something where the people that come in here are doing so with intention, like they're truly seeking this out and not just stumbling upon it. And so we've had only wonderful experiences and given wonderful experiences to everyone out here, thankfully. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was going with that.
No, I loved that. And I loved the Slow Down series. I'll find that, because I think that that's good, not just for children, but also for adults.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful series of books.
And you guys really do make an incredible space. And I understand that. Josh and I have been reticent to invite people onto the farm, because it does open you up, and this becomes your sense of place. And I think that there's something really sacred about place too, especially I know that we've been looking to have a place for a long time, to feel a sense of belongingness with place and to be a part of our environment. And so it kind of trickles down.
Yeah, for sure. I think what's interesting, we were talking about living in the city versus living on a ranch or a farm. When Taylor and I lived in the city, I felt like we were constantly like seeking out. We were like, where are we going to go next? Let's jump on an airplane and go travel to here and there. And we were constantly looking for beauty and in nature, really. Like, where can we go do some trail runs? Where can we go find a beautiful ocean or whatever? And then we moved out to the ranch, and something shifted. And I don't know if it's from like having kids or maybe just being like more of a homebody, but truly, like, there is like, I want to go travel for the sake of the girls. I'm like, they should probably go see the ocean, or we need to go to a rainforest and see these things that we learn about in books. So it's important, but I can't wait to get back to this place, like to our space. It is so sacred, and it's just different than any home or house or city that I've lived in. It is such a refuge. It's something that I always intentionally seek to come back to. Like, let's not make our trip too long. Can't wait to get home.
Can't wait to get home. I always feel that way.
Yeah.
It's funny that you bring that up, and you bring that up in the idea of slowing down, because I had a very specific, and I want to keep your house private, but I had this really specific feeling with the way that you and Taylor built your house. And I don't know what the story is, and you don't need to share it, but there was a really, unless you want to, but there was a really felt sense of just be here. There was an intention with which you crafted the way each space sort of holds what it's, in that kitchen. You are meant to be there with food, with people. And it's so clear from the architecture and the way that you designed it that it just asks you, like, just be here in this space right now. There's nowhere else you need to be. Mm-hmm. And so whatever that is about slowing down, I think somehow, whether it was intentional, which I'm curious about, or if it just happened, you baked that into kind of how your lives felt, just glimpsing them.
Mm. Well, the way that our house was built is kind of on accident, to be completely honest. Mm-hmm. We were inspired by the homesteads of like the 1800s around here. And so the way that they built the houses, where they had dog trots. And so there would be like a structure, and then what would be called a dog trot, or like a breezeway in the center, and then a structure on the other side. And then on one side would be where you live. So the whole family would live in one room, and then there'd be a dog trot, and that's like your breezeway, so you can get airflow in the summer because Texas is so hot. And then on the other side is where you would do your stuff, like cooking, and pretty much I'm like, what else did they do back in the day? Cook.
Butcher things.
Yeah, butcher things, do things. And so
tell stories.
Yeah. So we really wanted to replicate that like concept of like the family lives in this one space, and then they do stuff in this other space. And that's it. And then we built it like that, and we tried to live in one room all together, and it was a disaster. Like never, ever, ever should I be living in the same room as my kid. It was so disruptive to everyone. But we ended up adding on, and we were like, well, we love this concept of like, here's our spaces. Like this is one space, and then this is where you do this, and this is where you work out, and this is where you eat, and then this is where you sleep. And having it like that allows us to also interact, not just in those spaces really super intimately, but also interact with our environment at all times. Like in order for me to go get a glass of water, I have to know what the weather feels like that day. Like I have to go outside, walk downstairs, walk upstairs, and go to a different building. And it was super intentional. Like it's so important for us to connect every single day with the sunrise, the sunset, and, like our environment. Yeah. And it allows us to, I think about this slow down book. It allows us to really slow down, like as I'm walking across the area to the other building, I am watching the cats jump into the tree and have a fight at the top of the tree, or I'm watching the geese swim in my pool. Like I'm connecting with more than just me, which I think is just so important, because we are just tiny little spectacles in this ecosystem. And if we can't place ourselves within the larger system, I think that we really get lost. So anyway.
I agree. And I think sometimes when we're looking at these computers, even those of us that are farming and ranching get stuck in, I call it my office rat phase. And and I think within that myopia, you lose that perspective that you're just a speck in a place, and how important it is to be small in the relationship, in the interconnected web of things. It doesn't make you less than, but to feel that sense of, oh, okay, like I'm just a piece of a whole.
Mm-hmm. I think for some people it removes meaning from their life. Like, oh, all I am is this tiny little speck in this greater good. I guess my existence doesn't matter. But at the same time, for me, it really, it brings me peace to know that no matter what, the sun is rising. No matter what is going on with me, the sun is rising. The cats are playing in the tree. There's insects are crawling around. Like, no matter what, that is the one truth for me, is that there is like a system that is constantly flowing, and I can choose to be present in it, or I can choose to be present only with myself. And I think that's a lonely place to be. So I find a lot of peace in being a big part of the bigger system.
How have you thought about that as you've started really building Rome Ranch? Because I think that relationships and our relationships to things are really central to, I don't know, what it means to farm for me, that I am a small piece of this and getting to bear witness to it and to see where I need to plant, or what needs tending this season. You know, what needs seeds, what needs movement from animals, what needs all these different pieces. And I'm wondering how you've begun to form those relationships. You guys have been on the ranch for 6 years. Did I lose you? There you are.
Yeah. Sorry, I lost you.
No, you're fine.
You said how you've begun to, and then you froze.
Yeah, how you've begun to be a participant in that ecosystem at Rome Ranch over the last 6 years, and to find your place as that participant, like as a co-creator. And I think this is a word that we both like. As a co-creator, you have these beautiful, ecosystem engineers, architects, whatever you want to call them in the bison. And then you're a piece of this too. And I just wonder how it's been finding that space.
It's changed. Like, my perception of that has changed so drastically over the last 6 years. And the way that we've managed has changed so drastically over the last 6 years. When we first came in, it really felt a lot like we really focused a lot on what we didn't want. We didn't want the invasive species. We didn't want the thistles. We didn't want there to be things growing that we didn't want here. We didn't want mosquitoes, we didn't want things. And then it started to shift to focusing on what we did want, and recognizing that if we can focus on what we do want, the things that we don't want will take care of themselves. It's because typically, if you can grow more grass, which is what we wanted, then the thistles will disappear over time. It was this recognition that there's succession in everything, and finding beauty in the succession. And fast forward a couple years, realizing that focusing on what we do want actually blinded us to things that were happening that we still don't want. This sounds silly.
No, it doesn't. No, this sounds like how farming unravels.
Yeah. So we're focusing on growing grass, for instance, and not focusing on all this other stuff that we don't like. And then suddenly this year, or maybe it was last year, we were like, oh my God, 50% of that paddock is covered in cactus. So we can't grow grass there. So we thought that this thing was going to take care of itself, but we didn't manage it that way, because we thought that if we just focused on growing grass, this thing would magically disappear. And so it's trying to find that balance between how much, I'm going to say interference do we have with the natural process. Taylor and I were talking yesterday about, we've been doing an excessive amount of cactus removal.
I've seen you doing some cactus removal on social media. It's fun.
It's so fun. I love it.
How do you do it?
You get a shovel, you go out and you dig it up. It's awesome. Dig it up. Yeah, it's so destructive and terrible, but it's also not. It's also amazing. We've been really focusing on little growth stuff. Obviously, big growth stuff has an incredible amount of habitat in it. You know, you'll find field mice, and there's quail, and there's black widows, and there's beetles. There's so much that lives in a cactus and underneath the cactus. You have no idea. But we were talking yesterday while we were digging up cactus, and we were just talking about how our management style has really shifted to focusing on feeling. And we've really started trying to feel what the land is telling us. I'm not trying to be woo-woo, but like,
no, it's
quite literally, we feel like our land is telling us, it is telling us things. Your land is telling you things all the time. It's really how you're reading it and how you're interpreting it. And so we've been trying to actually become a lot more intimate listeners to the land.
Mm-hmm.
So like, actually, like, Taylor was removing cactus without his shoes on yesterday.
That makes sense so for Taylor.
Stupid. But, you know, becoming just like so much more and such better listeners. And so we've been listening to the land, and it's hungry, and it's thirsty, and it's hot, and it has a fever. You know, it's sick in some areas, and in some areas it's thriving. But what it's really trying to tell us is like, it needs less animals on it. It needs more rest. You know, like we need to be treating it like we treat our kid when she's sick. You know, like we remove impact. We give her rest. We limit certain things. We give her more of other things. And so it's going from just focusing on what we don't like to what we do like, to sort of a combination, to now like really trying to understand the feeling that the land is telling us, is sort of transformed how we are moving forward with our management practices.
I want to ask this because I think it's important to identify for all of us to kind of begin to open source. How do you listen? Like, what does that process look like for you and Taylor? Do you sit quietly on the land? Is this a discussion that you and Taylor are having while you walk across the land? Is it a combination of many different things? How do you listen?
I feel that listening happens constantly, like truly constantly, and it shifts and changes, and it looks different all the time. Yesterday, it looked like picking cactus with no shoes on. The day before, it looked like, well, last night, actually, with our daughter, it looked like, quite literally, and I'm not trying to sound crazy person, but it looked like hands and knees, no shoes, hands on the ground, like on a soft piece of grass. And Scout was like, Scout is so spiritual. She's so much more spiritual than me, and I like admire it so much. She was like, "Mama, come and get Taylor." And her were on the ground with their hands and knees in the grass. She was like, "Mama, get down here. This is how you're going to connect with God." So I came down there and I was like, "Okay, so I'm going to be connecting with God." And she said, "The closest you can get to God is through touching the soil." And so we're touching the soil, and suddenly, like, there's just like a shift. You know, your hands are in the soil, your knees and your feet are all touching it. And there's a shift. And suddenly, like, your body, my body, tells me to shift my focus. And like, I turned my head up and I was like, oh my God, you guys, there are hundreds of purple martins above our heads. You know, just like something that was there while I was sitting on the porch that I just had no awareness of, like, because I wasn't listening. I wasn't present with it. And so it just listening looks different in every scenario. It can be a walk. It can be a walk without shoes. It can be putting your hands in the ground. Listening can be, so this is just a silly little side example, but so we have this pasture we call the perennial pasture in Taylor. It was one of the most degraded pastures that we inherited. It had less than 0.5% of organic matter when we bought the property. And now it's like around 2.5%.
With a goal of 8. Is that right?
With the goal of endless scaling.
Endless bounty.
I mean, 8 would be just pretty incredible. But so we're at about 2.5. But Taylor, his focus is energy on this pasture for a while. You know, like he always makes sure that there's a cover crop in there. It finally got to the point where he could put in perennials. He's been doing more maintenance and focus on that pasture than ever. And one of the things that he has to do is he has to drive out there a lot. And so he's driving on this pasture, which I'm like an anti driving on pasture person. Yeah. Like you don't put your wheels on pasture unless it's the road. And literally this week, we're starting to see what we're calling a mesquite forest. And so, you know, I don't know if you're familiar with mesquites, but they're these mean little trees in Texas and they have spikes all over them. The spikes will go through your shoes. If you step on one, it'll stab your foot. And they pop tires, they pop wheels. They're mean. So this week we see all these mesquites start popping up, and Taylor said, I really started listening. And I think that the pasture is telling me that it doesn't want me to drive in it anymore. Like I'm hurting it on accident. And so it's popping up all these mesquites so it can pop my tires, basically. It's protecting itself. It doesn't want me on it anymore. So like all this stuff I've been doing to try to improve it, it's hurting it. It's hurting it unintentionally. And we're improving it, but it's still hurting. So that made me like tear up for some reason. I was like, I feel like we're hurting the pasture.
I think it's powerful. I mean, because it's a relationship, right? Like, I think that we've put the word relationship just in the realms of how we relate to our spouses, to our kids, to our parents, to our friends. And we've forgotten that we have a relationship with earth, with soil, with the place we're in, with a pasture, with a stand of grass, with a mesquite tree. And that within that relationship, there can be hurt and pain, right? Like, and to see that be communicated through this manifestation of mesquite trees of like, hey, I'm hurting. But the most amazing thing is that Taylor saw that. And heard that in that relationship, right? Like that, I don't want to call it a cry for help, but hey, this is hurting me. And I need you to see that. And then to see that and to treat it like we would a sick child or a dear friend. Right.
It was really impactful for me to hear him say that, because I've been telling him like, I just don't feel good about there's something telling me that you shouldn't be doing X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. And he's like, well, how's it going to get better? And then this popped up and he was like, oh my gosh. Yeah, it's telling me something. I think we need to let it rest.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenging part with communicating with something that doesn't speak English. Is you're trying to, it's like my 2-year-old. It's like you're trying to interpret what they're trying to tell you, and you don't get it right all the time.
Nope, you don't.
Yeah.
And that has to be okay too, right? Like we're gonna try, we're gonna fail, we're gonna do some good, we're gonna do a little bit of harm. And this is actually something that Josh and I have been talking a lot about the last couple of weeks is, as farmers, you unintentionally do harm. And the burden of responsibility that represents, that sometimes, whether it's a relationship with an animal or with a piece of land, you make a decision that ends up resulting in something that you never would have wished. And you have to accept that, to see it, and to internalize it, and to try to do better next time. But it's weighty, it's heavy.
Yeah, it's hard. I think something else that's hard is just having so much good intention, and then accepting that regardless of intentions, there's so much harm that can be done.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's tough. Like these are actually some of the emotions that I don't think I hear farmers, land stewards, ranchers, whatever word you use for it, talk about enough, that there is this element of responsibility of grief, right? Of grief when you get it wrong. And that's not, oh no, it's not easy.
Yeah. I think the hard part about being a human within like this larger ecosystem and trying to practice like regenerative land practices is that, you know, the way that I think about regenerative ag is like you're trying to work with nature. You're trying to replicate how Mother Nature would operate. But you have to balance like animal welfare in there. And I'm just going to give you the example of in Texas over the last like 5+ years. I'm going to just say 5. We've been in like a drought. Like our rainfall has just plummeted over the last 5 years. And so what happens to wildlife is they don't reproduce as much, you know, like it's just the natural cycle of things is if there's less resources, there's going to be less babies, period. But we're managing bison regeneratively. And so you would expect, I kind of expected our birthing rates to be super low, but they have the same amount of resources regardless of what's going on with the drought because we are humans and we have access to water. And we can't starve them, you know, so we're like fighting this natural process. And I just don't know what the solution to it is. Like our pregnancy rate was like 95% this year. And I was disappointed. I was truly disappointed. I wanted us to have like 20-30% pregnancy rates, breeding rates, because that's what our land can handle. But because of our resources, our imposed resources.
Yeah.
Suddenly we're not in alignment with nature. And so we're really defying the laws of nature with our regenerative management style. I can't balance those two things.
And they're hard to balance. And because where does that leave you? Do you put pressure on these animals from a more of a welfare standpoint so that they are more in tune with place?
Right.
That's tough.
I don't feel good. I mean, unless I'm putting myself through those same pressures, then I don't feel like it's like ethical for me to be like,
no,
sorry, I'm not bringing water in your pasture tonight. Good luck. Maybe you'll find some tomorrow.
Yeah, that's not the sort of contract. I don't know. Nicolette Nyman talks about the contract that we've entered into with animals as their stewards to provide them with resources, with shelter, especially for domesticated species. But I think that anytime something is under your care, it's kind of falling under that space and feels like a violation of that sort of unspoken contract.
Right.
Yeah, that's complicated. Does that mean that you reduce over the next couple of years, not knowing what the weather will hold?
Yeah. We can talk about this more when you come into town because I feel like you're going to have some good ideas. But, you know, for me, I'm like, let's get all of the breeding bulls out, period. Like, I don't want them breeding this year. But bison are different. You know, we can't just call up somebody and be like, we got 14 bulls. You want them? Yeah. It's just, I can't bring them to auction. Like, I can't.
Yeah, sure.
It's just different. So
I didn't think about some of those built-in bison specific challenges. Yes. Yeah.
And then Taylor's worried, you know, say we did take away the bulls, for instance. He's like, well, I mean, the females are still going to go into heat. So are we hurting them? Like, is there a desire that we're not meeting for them? There's a lot to think about.
There is a lot to think about. And heats are crazy. Like what heats do to animals is one of the most incredible things I've witnessed on the farm. Just like what an animal will do to get in with.
To get some.
Yeah. Yeah. We have had goats jump out of like 7-foot high windows, like clear them with bars on them to get at the male, to get at the billy. So it's intense. That drive is intense.
And as people, it's so interesting to be like, we also go through this.
Oh yeah.
But are we listening?
Well, I resent completely that my libido is so high for this little window during the month, and then it just kind of tapers off.
Yeah.
But man, you hit ovulation, and it's like, okay, yeah, let's go. So I think there's something. I think there's something there.
Yeah.
Something that you and Taylor do a really beautiful job of, and I think that you've done such a good job of on the podcast is telling stories and using story as a way to draw people in. I think you actually use two devices that are really interesting. You use story, and going through all of your ranch stories on the Where Hope Grows podcast was honestly one of the most delightful things. And just hearing your reflections from owls and from bison vision quests and all of these hard and fun and beautiful stories. And I think that you marry that too with telling a story in the way that you bring people in from packaging and design. That you have a way of building story and getting that hook, right? And I think that design aspect is kind of a hook into, ooh, okay, I'm curious about what is the rest of this story. And just think that you've done a really good job as business owners telling stories and making it fun.
Oh, well, thank you. I would have to give credit to Taylor on that. I think that he is the ultimate storyteller. And I always poke fun at him because I think he's a really big exaggerator.
He's a tall tale teller, but in the best way.
It's exactly what makes stories worth listening to. And you think about how we as a species have really come to understand who we are and where we are from is all through storytelling. And storytelling, it defines us. It really I feel like it grounds us. I'm thinking specifically about our family. Scout loves nothing more than hearing stories about who, what she's done or something that happened, or even stories about us. She loves stories. They're an opportunity, they're an opportunity to instill values, to inspire, to offer hope. Stories are everything. And so, yeah, we absolutely love stories in every capacity, whether it's, relaying that to people that listen to the podcast, to our children. Everything is a story, truly. And I don't know. I love stories. They're the best.
I love stories too. And I've loved listening, in preparation for this, I listened to all of your ranch stories that you do once a quarter, whatever it is, together and kind of reflect on some of these different trials, tribulations, triumphs on the ranch. They're delightful stories. And I think they also really highlight how hard it is. They really brought me back to feeling a little bit better about myself for how many times our cows and horses have gotten out and what a nightmare it is, which I think is important. And it sounds kind of silly, but I think that as first generation farmers, there is this normal? Is this happening to other people? Is it just me that's chasing down my cows on the highway?
Yeah, absolutely. But stories connect, just like you just said. It is so important to put things out there that do happen to everybody, because we all feel like such fools. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We've had a couple of really big ones, and so I want to encourage everybody to go seek out some of those stories with you and with Taylor. I actually want to dive into how the girls have changed your shape, the shape of how you view the ranch. Mm-hmm. I think you've said this a couple of times, and we had such an interesting conversation about children while I was there, and having them. And I think that throughout this conversation, there's been bits of, I was really touched by the story about Scout listening to the soil and getting close to God, and how children have changed your relationship to ranching and to how you think about some of these bigger concepts, whether it's within business or just within your homestead.
The girls have I've changed the way I think about everything. Having kids is just so next level. It's so weird. Before we had kids, I was just like, yeah, you just like have a kid and it just kind of like is there and toodles along with you. But you never really truly know how transformative a child is. It opens your eyes up to just I feel so corny. The miracle of life, like truly the miracle of life. You mean you see cats having babies and you see bison having babies, but until like I actually had a baby, like those experiences, even for those animals, was just not the same. It just wasn't the same. And just the care that you can see animals giving to their little ones is different. Like, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. It's just transformative. But having the girls out on the ranch has been interesting. So we had the ranch ever since Scout was 3 months old, but we were living in Austin half the time. So we would be living in Austin for 3 days and coming out to the ranch for 4 days, and doing that for a couple years, probably until she was 4. Yeah, till she was 3.5. We did that for about 3 years. And then we moved out here full time. And it transformed Scout in ways that I will never be able to describe. But we had our second baby out here. And so like she's never known any different. And just, I guess the girls have really transformed our vision for what we want the ranch to be. Mm-hmm. You know, like when you're planting a tree, you're never doing that selfishly. Like you don't plant a tree for you. You are planting a tree for your children and their children, because you're never going to be able to enjoy the shade, the fruit, etc. And so it's been interesting the way that we've thought about creating a space that is for future generations. Taylor last night went to bed and he woke me up and said, I've been thinking, I can't fall asleep. I've been thinking, we've planted 56 species, different types of trees just around the house. And he was so excited about it. He was so excited. He was like, I've been counting them off in my head, 56 different species of trees. The girls are going to be so lucky when they're older. And you know, it's exciting to know that like you're giving something that is so much greater than yourself, and for yourself. Cause it's truly like a gift for them. Everything that we do is a gift for them or for whoever else might be on this land later on. It's really not for us. We can't really enjoy the benefit of any of those things, but the ranch has really offered me, I feel like, a space where I can provide them hope for the future. You know, like it's not like sometimes I get like sad and people, maybe even yourself, maybe I heard you say this, or maybe it was my other friend, but say, you know, like, well, why would I have a kid? Like, what is there the future is kind of sad. You know, there's all these political issues, cultural issues, climate issues. Like, am I just bringing them into a world that is full of dread? And I really see like children as like, they are like the hope, they are the future. And if we can bring children into beautiful spaces and places and teach them to be a part of the larger ecosystem, to see themselves as a piece of the ecosystem, then the future is not going to be dreary and sad. And, you know, like they will be the change so long as they have an opportunity to connect with the spaces, that are so transformative. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with any of this.
It's perfect. And you wrapped up one of the episodes that you guys did. Taylor asked you what you wanted to leave your children, and you said that you wanted to leave them shade. And I thought it was, and you just said that in so many words. And I thought it was one of the most beautiful things I had ever heard. I thought it was one of the most hopeful things that I had ever heard in a lot of ways, because I think there's something about that experience, that felt experience of shade on a hot day, when you can actually palpably feel the temperature drop, and there is this sense of relief and respite and the ability to sort of recoup some energy from the hot sun to go back out and to do your work with a renewed sense of things, maybe a renewed sense of hope that it communicated so much in just shade. You want to leave the girls shade.
Shade is critical in Texas. It's so important. And I mean, you just say everything so beautifully, but it's not just an opportunity for rest and relief. It's really, the concept of shade to me is, when I think of shade, it means that there's an ecosystem. There's something so big and so great that it can provide not just you, but other living things, habitat and food and shelter and temperature control. Like, there's so much more to it than just a little spot to sit. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for pulling it back out into the bigger picture. I needed that. Yes. So much more opportunity for that, and to bring down the fever of that land too,
right.
Which is something. Yeah. I love the way that you said that earlier, to bring down that fever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so much hope in nature. Like, I feel like it's constantly trying to communicate little snippets of hope to us. And it's just like up to us to be able to hear, to listen, to be able to identify where that hope is coming from, and to really like support it. It's much like supporting the land is, in a way, is the way that I think about supporting children. Like, children are not born blank slates. Some people think that. In my opinion, children are not born blank slates. Like, they are born with like an ever present wisdom and sense of self, and it's really up to us to be able to support those things and pull those things out of children so they can contribute at a larger scale. And I think about that with the land. Like, the land has it all. It's already there, and it's up to us to be able to listen and to be able to support in ways that we can for it to thrive, just like children.
I wonder if you might talk a little bit more about hope, because I think that you guys have done, more than anybody, such a good job of making that a part of the conversation. And I think, in regenerative agriculture, we can get a little down a little quickly. And, as we were talking about the What Good Shall I Do conference, one of the things that you and Taylor impressed, like, we want people to leave with a sense of hope. And I had to sit with that for a while. And I've actually been reading a lot about hope and listening to some strange philosophers talk about hope and questioning what hope is to me, and what that experience of hope is. Because I hadn't thought, we're just not being given hope very often.
Almost never. And I think hope is, I think it goes back to this idea of, the perennial plant. Hope is something that is foundational. It's the roots. It's what builds resilience. I think hope builds resilience. And you have to have a sense of hope. You have to be resilient to be able to thrive. And I think you're right. Like, we have so little opportunity for hope. Everything on the news, everything on social media, everything is just, it's confusing. There's lack of truth. And I think hope sort of umbrellas it all, or it's an opportunity to umbrella it all and push it all back down to some sort of foundational I feel like you know what I'm talking about, but
I do. I was picturing, as you were talking, I was thinking about grass, and I was thinking about tap roots, right? And I was thinking about hope growing. I was thinking a little bit about the podcast Where Hope Grows. And I was thinking about the idea that like hope is that taproot that keeps us anchored when times are lean and when times are plenty, right? Like it reaches deep into the soil to provide us with some foundation, with some nutrients, with some water.
Yeah. I always, your analogy, I always think about with like really big old trees. I think about trees as being like rooted, like super rooted, and they're super resilient. Trees are like the ultimate vision of hope for me. You have this tree that can kind of withstand everything. It's storms, armadillos breaking up all your roots. You got everybody living inside of you and on top of you. You know, you're this big tree, and you don't get to walk away. And I think that's sort of where hope kind of falls into all of this, is like there's this ever-present need, desire, requirement as humans to contribute to society in some capacity, to the world in some capacity. And we really need to think about it as like our responsibility. Like we can't walk away. We're like a tree.
Yeah.
Like our responsibility can't just be pushed aside. And so we need it. If we are full of hope, it means that we are rooted and resilient, and we can withstand whatever climate change crisis somebody's propaganda need to us, or whatever political whatever is coming after us, or whatever drought we're facing. Just knowing it's sort of like the sun rising every day. Just knowing that the sun is rising every day is enough hope for me to get up the next day and just keep getting after it. I don't know.
Something I really like about what you communicated was that there's a sense of agency and of purpose and maybe even responsibility in hope, because I think that for me, that really anchors hope beyond just, I think with the news and the sort of inundation of negative feedback that we get in these cycles, hope feels insubstantial and wispy. And I wonder if some of that insubstantialness of hope is actually that there's no doingness in it. That part of hope is taking some agency and responsibility and some semblance of action. And I think that can look a lot of different ways. But when we actually do from a place of hope, maybe that strengthens hope itself.
I think, yeah, totally. I think that hope is, it's either like ingrained in you or it's not. And I think it's something that you can build. I think that it comes from something that's inspiring. It's something that you can allow yourself to build upon, but ultimately it's a mindset. And if you're not, it's like any type of mindset. If you're not willing to shift your mindset from dreary weary to seeing that there is hope, then you're not ever going to be hopeful, you know? So it's truly a choice to feel inspiration, to feel hope, to feel like the future is not dreary. I think
I love that
from a child's book.
I think it was perfect. I love the idea of hope being a choice. That you do sometimes have to wake up and choose hope. Look at the sunrise and choose hope in the face of unhopeful circumstances. And I think that I just really like that because I've been thinking about it a lot since you and Taylor kind of put that forth. Like, okay, what is this? And so thank you for diving into that for me.
Yeah.
I want to be careful with time, but I don't want to wrap up without talking about ground meat and how amazing it is.
I love that you love ground meat. It's like my favorite thing ever.
I have a lot of pieces of things that we could talk about. I hate to pull us just directly out of hope, but I kind of want to talk about this because I think it's so important. Because you and Taylor built a business around the thing that we all have too much of.
Mm-hmm.
And you made it feel sexy and fun and exciting again.
I'm so excited you think that.
I really think this. And I really think it's important. You know, Josh and I have spent so much time doing yield tests. And even with the way that we cut, if we have an 800-pound hanging weight carcass, we're still going to get 200 pounds of ground meat. You know, industry standard is going to be closer to 400, but, you know, we can maybe get it down to 200. And so there's just always going to be a lot of ground meat.
There sure
and you
is.
guys took that and you ran with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I personally love ground meat. I feel like it's versatile. It's delicious. You can put it pretty much in anything. If I'm ever like, I'm hungry, I'm like, I'm going to go cook up some ground meat. Like nobody's just like, I'm going to go make a steak really quick. It's like ground meat is where it's at. And you know, it makes a lot more sense. We talked about symbiosis earlier, but as you said, there is a problem with farmers and ranchers in that there are prized possessions called steaks, and there are very few of them. And so it's not just that we're trying to make it make sense. Of course, it makes the most sense to really claim the prized possession as grind because it's more nutrient dense. There's a shit ton of it. You're going to get the most off of that animal if you're willing to utilize the majority of the parts of that animal. And you know, farmers need to get rid of trim. And I don't want to say get rid of it. I mean, it's not like it's like free for us or anything, but
there's too much of it. It's part of the system that's it's not being wasted, but it's not being purchased. So, I mean, it's kind of a weak point in the system. You know, our rule at Western Daughters is we can only buy as many whole animals as we can sell grind.
Mm-hmm. But I think that the whole thing about us buying and making a business out of grind is that it really is, it's symbiotic for the rancher, but it's also symbiotic with the consumer because there's this huge opportunity to educate consumers on what does it look like to even break down a carcass? Like how much how many steaks can you actually get out of here? Versus how much grind can you get out of here? Like, let's make this make sense. If you had a cow for yourself, how many steaks could you get out of it? And how much grind would you have? How many hearts would you have? Some people want to just eat liver all the time. And it's like, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. But do you know how many livers an animal has? Or do you know how many hearts an animal has? Like, let's talk through this. Like, it just, and I think that there's likely a symbiotic relationship between how much of a particular organ or meat cut an animal has to what your body actually needs. And so, for instance, you know, we butchered a bison at a field harvest the other day, and we had about half of a heart left that we brought home that night. And Taylor ate a fourth of the heart, which was a lot for one person. And afterwards, he was like, my body is literally telling me like that is the most nutrient dense thing I've ever eaten. And I don't need any more for probably a month, you know, like and so I think that the opportunity to educate consumers on like listening to their body is so critical. And educating consumers on like what you can get out of grind versus a steak. Like all of that collagen.
All of that collagen.
Oh.
Whenever anybody asks me, like, what's your favorite way to get collagen? Ground meat.
For sure. Yeah. 100%.
And they're always surprised. They're always like, wait, what? And it's
what?
Like, yeah, ground meat is packed full of collagen. That's all the tough cuts.
It's a magic. Yeah. It's the beauty of it. And so you don't need to buy the powdered, bleached, deodorized, whatever
Please
collagen.
Don't.
Stop doing that. Just buy
Please don't
meat.
buy that.
Yeah, it's so simple. Anyway, but I think that the symbiotic relationships are really present, I feel like, within this business, because it's so critical for producers. It's so critical for consumers on the education front and on the nutrition front. And it's just logical.
How do you think about education? This is something that's come up on the podcast a lot lately, is how do we... and I think we've talked a little bit about that with story, but how do we pull consumers into education in a way that isn't a soapbox or what I call proselytizing in education, right? Like, I want education to feel good and to feel somewhat passive, but it's not easy to sort of have these conversations around why ground meat, or why regenerative agriculture, or why just a little bit of organs and not just drowning ourselves in heart pills.
Right. So your question was how to educate, or why?
How do you think about education? Do you have a philosophy around education? Because I think
education should be a form of storytelling. I think that just like my girls read stories and they learn certain values or lessons, those things aren't being like thrown at them with bullet points. Like Scout doesn't get to the end of a story and say, man, I really shouldn't steal from my neighbor. The story was about what happens when you steal from your neighbor, right? And so then she absorbs the information. I think that you can educate through storytelling without having to like dump facts on people. I mean, facts are actually awesome, but I think too many facts get people sort of like
disconnected,
glazed over, just not interested anymore. But I think through storytelling, it's such a cool opportunity to educate people. And I think just real life examples of stuff is the most impactful. Connecting people back to something that is actually tangible, something that is real. It's something that we do. I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but something that we do with Force of Nature. If you order a box online, for instance, we have soil builder stories. And so you'll get like a little postcard, and it's a story about a soil builder. And so the soil builder could be anything from our bison named Poppy to our pear tree out there to the guardian dogs. And within the story, it educates people on how these different things on our ranch are truly building soil in their own little ways. And, there's facts thrown in there about bison hooves, spade shaped, whatever, but it's not it's not thrown at you like a textbook. It's embedded within a story, and it's educational and fun. And that's sort of how we think about educating people, is just through relatable stories.
I love that. You do an incredible job. That soil builder card that's amazing. I think this is important, because I think that some of us are trying to figure out how we communicate about what we do in a way that feels good for everybody involved. And so I can see the example that you've set at Force of Nature, that you've set at Rome, that you had set with Epic, of telling stories and drawing people in too visually, that we're visual learners, that we want to see a beautiful picture of a bison, and we want to see these little clips and videos of things that make us kind of think, oh, what's happening there? I want to learn a little bit more about that, and done a really amazing job of it.
I think that one thing that's critical in the storytelling part is that you can't, there just has to be real true authenticness behind it all. Like, you can't go hire an ad agency or a marketing firm and be like, we need some stories. It's like, these things actually have to be real. Or we need some pictures. Can you get us some pictures of some bison or whatever? Like, people, consumers can just see through all that shit. Like, it is so easy to look at something and be like, is this person, is this brand, is this company authentic? Or did they just go and hire out somebody to build out their brand voice?
Yeah.
I despise marketing firms and consultants. So I apologize to anyone who is one of those people.
We feel the same way. We feel the same way.
Stand them. Yeah.
One story coming from us.
Yeah.
You're gonna tell your best story.
Right. Yeah.
You know the story. Hopefully. Yeah.
Hopefully. And I think that's the hard part about ranchers and farmers in general is they're really good at ranching and farming. And they are not necessarily really good at marketing. And that's sort of where like Force of Nature comes in is, I don't expect, Will Harris, great marketer, incredible.
Totally.
But, like one out of hundreds of thousands out there that can't tell their story. And that's okay. They don't need to. They can also just focus on doing an incredible job at being a land steward. And then it's our job to tell the stories for them.
Yes.
And that also puts into place how important it is to have real relationships with our partners.
Yes.
We're not just like finding a broker to go find us some meat. It's like we have real relationships with real people. Like the relationship is everything. It's everything over everything.
Before we wrap up, can we talk a little bit about the role of and I don't know what word you like, but I'm going to say the aggregator, like the person that is going to farms, building relationships and then, packaging under one umbrella their meat while still telling these stories, because I think that this is really important in the space of regenerative agriculture.
Yeah. We are the aggregator.
Yeah.
Force Nature is the aggregator. And I don't know how deep you want me to go into it. Like, do you want me to tell how it works, or what are you thinking?
I don't know. I think people might be a little bit curious about how it works, but I think also just from a sort of 30,000 foot view of why we need aggregators, because I think that we're not thinking about this enough in regenerative ag. I think we're getting too siloed. And I love the independent spirit, but I think that a lot can happen when we put stuff under one umbrella. Like a lot of magic can happen, and we've forgotten that might be the case. So kind of that 30,000 foot view. But if you want to talk a little bit about how it works, I think that's great too.
Okay. Yeah. The way that Force of Nature works is we find partners, land stewards, we call them our land stewards, that are practicing under certain standards. So we have an internal standard for land management, and we aggregate them. So we find all these badass cattle ranchers, and some of them have direct to consumer products, and some of them don't. So we've found people that are really great at marketing that still need to sell off their trim. To people that, to some people that are not marketers at all and had been selling direct to the commodity market, but they're raising their animals regeneratively and grass fed. And so it's really our job to find these incredible land stewards and then put together a supply chain that can support a national demand. A lot of people don't have access to regenerative meat. And so if we can be that company to be able to provide them a connection between their meat and their rancher, that's incredible. And so it's so important that we have aggregators such as Force of Nature, because otherwise, as I was saying, like some of these ranchers are selling for pennies to the dollar at auctions. And it's just absolutely heartbreaking that somebody could be managing regeneratively and not getting any credit for it and not getting the price that they deserve for that management style. And that, their animal welfare standards are just like so far beyond. And so taking something that you raise with such care and love and bringing it to an auction barn,
it's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking for a farmer.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking as a consumer to not know your crap meat just came from the best ranch in the United States. They really deserve the credit and recognition for that product. So.
Yeah. And I think they also deserve a space where we are not asking ranchers to be everything. We are not asking them to be marketers. We are not asking them to be, packagers, distributors, to do it all. That it's okay to just really raise great meat and be a great land steward and to have a space where that goes. And I think especially, just read a statistic that the average farm or ranch in the United States operates on 1.5% profit margin. And that's an average. It's not sustainable.
I don't understand how farmers and ranchers make it. I mean,
I don't either.
I truly don't understand, because that is, how do you buy groceries on 1.5% margin? It's really, really terrible. Yeah. So we as consumers should absolutely not expect our farmers and ranchers to be everything, right? The farmer, the rancher, the marketer, the salesperson, the distributor, the figuring out how to send something with dry ice,
the
shipping
shipper.
Master.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a P&L master, finance person, like you can't expect that out of what should be a family.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to thank you for that and for really working to create the best situation for becoming an aggregator, because I think that this is an overlooked part of our food system that is really needed. And we really need people that are thinking about it the way that you and Taylor and Robbie are thinking about it.
I think the risk in being an aggregator is that I think there's definitely other aggregators out there. We are not the only aggregator.
No.
But the risk in being an aggregator is that your standards get lower and lower as your scale increases and the demand increases, because you need access to more and more.
Yeah.
And a lot of the other aggregators out there are able to sort of operate under this halo effect of, they're bullshitters is what I'm getting at here.
The trust that they have built in the perceived trust that they have in the marketplace. Why don't we? Is that a diplomatic way of putting it?
Yeah, that is a diplomatic way of putting it. There's so much confusion in how ranches operate, how animals are raised, how animals are fed, how animals are slaughtered. There's so much complexity behind it. I mean, people like you and me are just fascinated by it. And so we're willing to do what it takes to really educate ourselves on it. But the majority of people want to go to the grocery store and feel or order something online and feel like they're making a good decision for the animal and for the rancher and for the land. And it's really easy to deceive consumers now. And it's really unfortunate. And so I think what I was getting at is, as an aggregator, I am going back to this idea of you have so much responsibility, because you are providing people with a sense of hope that there is a solution for them to consume meat that fits their values, but it's your responsibility to actually fit those values, to really own up to the things that your consumer thinks you are.
Yeah.
Is that making sense?
Yes. And to balance as you grow, to ensure that you are maintaining that standard in growth, which is not easy.
Yeah. And ultimately, this goes back to this conversation we were having about business early. Ultimately, if you can't meet demand because you can't meet all the standards that you would want to reach, that means that you should stop growing at that point, or that means that supply chain needs to be limited to a certain amount of customers or a certain number of retailers. We have to do that all the time with our products. Like we only have enough regenerative grass-fed bison to be able to fulfill this product line with 3 retailers. So that's our cap. Those 3 retailers are everything for us, plus, maybe direct to consumer. But like, we're not going to go pitch that product elsewhere because we don't have the supply for it unless we lower our standards. And so like, yes, maybe our revenue and our growth could be like fucking all over the place, but our values would have been degraded at that point. And we'd be deceiving people.
Thanks for being those people.
Oh, no problem. I
really appreciate that.
I just needed somebody to do it. And so if nobody else was going to do it, you got to do it yourself.
Yep.
You know that.
I do. I know we're running out of time. Thank you for all of this. We didn't get to sourcing string and everything under the sun. Did I miss anything major that you want to make sure that you include?
No, I think it was great. I'm really sorry about earlier with Scout.
Don't be.
It's her teacher.
Don't be. I want to point people. Are there still conference tickets left?
I think we have like 50 tickets left.
Okay. I don't know. By the time this comes out, might be a little dicey.
Go get your ticket.
So come to the What Good Shall I Do conference.
Yeah, Kate's going to be like
21st and 22nd.
Yeah, we have Kate all over the place. You're going to be opening.
There's too much Kate.
No, there's not. It's funny because we didn't mean to make it all about Kate, but it's kind of turned into all about Kate.
It'll be great. It'll be about all of us together.
I'm so pumped.
Yeah, we're going to go on a vision quest together at the beginning of the conference. We're going to become seeds.
For sure. I love that.
It's going to be trippy.
So you're going to be opening, you're going to be doing a butchery demonstration. And then you're talking on a panel. I mean, it's just like Kate overload. There's so much in your brain that I can't wait to hear.
Well, I can't wait to be there and to share in all of it with you. And I'm just so grateful for the opportunity. I hope you know that.
Oh, we're so pumped.
Where can people find you? Where can people find Force of Nature? It'll all be in the show notes, so I can also take care of that.
I'm not on social media, but Taylor runs our Rome Ranch account. I think it's at romeranch.com.
It is.
At Rome Ranch.
It's
whatever.
I
don't even know how these things
are. And at Force of Nature.
Force of Nature meets.
Is it meets? It's meets.
I don't know.
Force of Nature meets. We'll have it all. We'll have it all in the show notes.
Yeah,
we'll just have it there.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for sitting down with me. I feel very special that I got a Katie interview.
Oh, no, thank you.
I know they're few and far between. So thank you for taking the time.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me. And I hope I didn't disappoint you.
Oh my gosh, you didn't. I'm gonna hit stop recording and no.